Welcome to the Homeschool Show from North Carolinians for Home Education. I'm your host, Matthew McDill. Our goal is to help you homeschool with confidence and joy. We have, again, Rhonda Marshall as our co-host today. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Well, again, today we have another special episode with highlights from Season 1 of the show. And there's some really great things that we're going to see, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to see this, and I hope you enjoy it.
That's right. And so don't forget that August 1st, we are going to be starting Season 2. It's amazing we already have a whole season under our belt.
That's amazing.
So join us August 1st for Season 2. But today, just enjoy all of the highlights that we have for you from Season 1.
Well, today we have the homeschool news first off, and we're going to listen to an interview with Dan Beasley. He's an attorney for HSLDA, and he's going to talk about a case in which social workers got a court order to inspect a home based on an anonymous tip. That sounds scary.
Yes.
Next, we'll have the homeschool tip of the week, and this week we're going to talk about you don't need to replicate school at home. And finally, we'll have our homeschool reality moment. And this is the segment where we take a look at what's going on in real homeschools in North Carolina, like yours.
That's right. So starting with the news, Rhonda, her husband Mike, and Dana, my wife, and I, as well as the Masons couple, another couple from our the NCHE board, were able to go to the Homeschool Legal Defense Association Leaders Conference, and this was near Cincinnati this year. It was a great experience. And Dan Beasley, who used to be the North Carolina attorney representative for HSLDA, was there, and we were able to sit down, and he was able to tell me this really kind of scary story about what happened and how they helped this homeschool family. So let's take a look and see what Dan had to say. So, Dan, I heard recently about a story that you were helping a family in North Carolina. Can you tell me about that?
Sure, yeah. So I got the opportunity to help a homeschooling family that had encountered a hostile social worker. And what happened is they actually got a note on the door. They were not home when the social worker came to their house to visit. And so they called the number, and the social worker explained that someone had made an allegation against their family of uninhabitable living conditions, or in other words, or more specifically, that the house was roach infested, and that the kids weren't in school. And so they knew this was not true, but they had some suspicion about who may have made the report. But they had someone who they'd had a little bit of a run-in with. They think made the allegation. Of course, they don't know for certain.
Yeah.
But they knew it wasn't someone who'd been in their house real recently, and they really weren't that interested in opening up their home and allowing a government official to walk through and do an inspection of their home.
Right.
When they didn't see the need for that to happen. Now, that's often a question of evidence. If the allegation that was made was more credible, they would maybe want to consider working something out. In this case, everything that we knew about the allegation was that it was anonymous. At least we had no information to know who made the report. And what the social worker did is basically they gave them a hard line in the sand. Either you cooperate and let us do our full investigation, or we're going to court. And that's when we actually found out about this case. A petition had already been filed in court requesting an order compelling the family to cooperate. And that order had actually already been issued ex parte, meaning only one party was involved. The family didn't have an opportunity to go to court at all. And so that was sort of the setting coming into the office when we first heard about it. And we were interested in learning some more details. And that's when we dug in, we found out the timeline, and it just seemed like there was no evidentiary basis for this report that had been made. We looked at the documents that were filed in court, and the social worker listed 2 sentences related to the allegation and the condition of the home and the kids not being in school. But it was just based on someone's allegation. No, no corroborating evidence. No, while we visited and we saw inside the house, and not,
Right.
no other evidence to support that just sort of naked allegation of a roach-infested house. So we talked with the family, and we were able to arrange to have some local counsel in North Carolina. Sorry, I almost said North Dakota. We're here at the conference, and I'm talking with leaders from many different states. But we had some local counsel who agreed to represent the family at the hearing, and they showed up, and we worked back and forth. I did with them to prepare some legal materials to prepare them for the hearing, and they showed up at the hearing and made the argument that these social workers are subject to the Fourth Amendment. If they're going to come into someone's home without consent, they need to have evidence. They need to have probable cause.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, the posture here again was actually a hearing on whether that order that was previously issued should have been issued or really should be continued. The interesting part of the case is that the social worker didn't actually come out to enforce the order
so it
prior
hadn't
to
happened
the
yet.
hearing. They hadn't been out to enforce the order. That would have been a little bit different situation. Now, why they did that, I'm not sure. Whether they knew, just not sure.
Yep.
But we had the opportunity to go to the hearing before the order that was previously issued had actually been enforced. And thankfully, something that happened back in the history of HSLDA, back in the early 2000s, there was a case in North Carolina that involved the search of the home, it involved a homeschooling family, and it involved allegations of neglect. And we represented the family in that case, took it all the way to the Supreme Court of North Carolina, and won. All right, so if you're going to overcome a parent's refusal to cooperate, North Carolina has a particular provision that allows social workers to file a motion in court to get to compel the family to cooperate. It's called an obstruction to the investigation. Our argument, consistent with the reasoning in the case in the early 2000s, which is called the Stumbo case, was that as part of that case, not only was that case dismissed because it was a one-time event, it wasn't a pattern of neglect, but the court ruled that, well, these investigations are subject to the Fourth Amendment. You've got to actually have evidence. And so, drawing on our experience in that case, kind of prepared us to make the argument in this case again, and we used that case to say, look, you've got to meet this evidentiary standard if you're going to come into the home. In this case, if there was more evidence, we need to hear the evidence. But just based on the allegations that were made, solely allegations from an unknown source, that's not probable cause. That's not sufficient cause, at least, to enter the home over a parent's objection. That was the core element of our case. And at the hearing, the judge, heard our legal argument, asked the state to respond, and they didn't have much of a response to that argument that, well, you got to have evidence, because they didn't know the identity of the person. Now, they wouldn't have to necessarily disclose the identity. That's something that they can keep confidential. But it would be relevant to whether they even knew who the person was internally, and whether there was any supporting evidence that this allegation even could be true, or is it just something that's made up. One thing that was helpful too that the family did is had a pest company, pest inspector, come in and walk through the house and say, actually, there are no services that we would provide here. There's no infestation. There's nothing here to provide. And we also had some documentation verifying the family's legal compliance in North Carolina. And so we presented that evidence largely to help the court understand that, look, this is not a question of necessarily what's happening. It's the legal standard. Are they subject to this evidentiary standard or not? So we said this shouldn't be necessary, and the judge actually ruled that it wasn't necessary for us to present that, but that the order should not be continued, and ultimately the case essentially was dismissed because the order was not continued. So it was a cool opportunity that we had to draw on our experience in creating some case law in North Carolina in the early 2000s to help stand up for the Fourth Amendment here, and the basic legal standard that you got to have some evidence if you're going to overcome a parent's decision not to allow a government official into their home.
So what kind of basic advice do you have for families in North Carolina? For example, if they get a request for a visit from social services or something, what's the appropriate response from parents?
Well, the first thing that I always recommend is finding out what it's about. What are the allegations here? And of course, if they're a member of HSLDA, I'd encourage the family to contact us, and we can help give them more specific guidance based on the situation at hand. Because not every allegation is the same. Some allegations are more credible on their face, depending on what's said. Allegations that include specificity as allegations that are from a known party, especially someone who has regular contact. But when it's an anonymous tip by, a neighbor or somebody who has a grudge against the family, that's relevant, and you're in a stronger position legally. But in general, I'd say get advice or get information. Get information, find out what's going on, get the caseworker to tell you what the situation is, and then get some advice.
So do they have to make an appointment? I mean, can somebody just show up at your door and all of a sudden you don't have time to get more information or call HSLDA or something?
Well, people can just show up at your door. I mean, you can't stop a social worker, for example, from coming to your house. Now, you don't have to consent to allow them in, but oftentimes they're going to show up if they get an allegation, and they're not going to necessarily call you in advance. If you're a member of HSLDA, we're on call 24/7, so you can call us at any time. You would be able to get us on the phone, while someone's at your door, and we can help you kind of assess, what the allegation is and what your response ought to be.
Okay. So you can ask, and they would have to inform you, I'm here because this allegation has been made against you, or.
Yeah, I mean they have to tell you the nature. Well, even for the state to receive federal funding, they're required as a condition to receiving that funding that they provide training on the Fourth Amendment and actually inform the individual of the allegations, the nature of the allegations that are made against them. So they should sometimes that doesn't happen. But in general, you should inquire, and you can expect them to tell you at least the nature of the allegations. Otherwise, how can you respond? How can you make a decision that's best for your family when you don't even know what this is about?
Right.
I do recommend, in general, allowing the caseworker to see your children, not interview them, but just to see that they're healthy. That they're not locked in a closet or something. But really, get information. And then get advice. Give us a call, and we'll help you kind of assess the situation. Go from there.
Thanks for the update.
Yeah.
And thanks for serving in North Carolina.
Glad to do it.
That was Dan Beasley, attorney with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and we are so grateful for the work that they do to defend homeschooling all across the nation. And you can go to hslda.org to learn more about what they do, and you can become a member, as Dan mentioned. If you're a member of HSLDA, then you will be able to have immediate counsel from them and immediate defense if you ever need it. So just recommend that you check that out.
Yeah, hopefully you don't need it, but
That's right.
Good insurance to have. Next, we have our homeschool tip of the week. And this week, our tip is you don't have to replicate school at home. Matthew, did you go to public or private, or what did you?
I was
you
a
went
public
to school, right?
kid. I did go to school.
Okay.
Can't tell. And I was a public school kid.
You were.
What about you?
I was a public school girl too. So,
Yeah. Did you, as a homeschool mom, were you tempted to carry over things from public school?
Absolutely. Can I tell you a story?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my story. I had little desk, and I had a flag, and we said, because that's what I knew, that was in my head of what school looks like. Nothing wrong with any of those. I wasn't quite as bad as or as good as
Did
my
you do the pledge, though? Were you about to say that?
We did say the pledge.
Did the pledge,
We
okay.
did the pledge.
Yeah.
And everything. The whole thing, just like what you would think about in elementary school. Yeah. And then a friend of mine, though, she took it a little farther. She would load up her kids in their minivan. Then they would go around the block. And then they would get out. And then they were at school.
Oh, this is the bus ride?
So this is a bus ride. So, yeah. So you don't have to do that. If it makes you happy, or your kids, you want to do it for fun for one time, by all means do it. But you don't have to do that. Just an FYI. But there's some other things that we don't have to do and replicate at home.
And the thing is, it's so common, especially for us, and our generation, and even a lot of others who are choosing to homeschool now, who were public schooled. And that's their reference.
That's all we have in our head.
It's just normal to understand that, of course, you're going to start trying to transfer those things. So let's talk about what are some of the things that people normally transfer, and how do we process whether we should or not in certain. Yeah.
Well, I think that one thing that's really key is that you don't have to keep everybody at one level. often all of us have strengths and weaknesses. So maybe you have a kid that needs remediated, so you can move them down a grade level in something they're struggling with.
And just in one subject.
And
maybe.
just in one subject. And then move up if there's they have strengths, just like we all do. And then you can move them up in the one area that they have a strength in. Another thing is we are not locked into the curriculum or the scope and sequence of the school. We don't have to do that. We don't even have to follow their calendar. We have to follow our homeschool law of 9 calendar months of the year with regular vacations. But that could look like 4 weeks on and 2 weeks off, or however we want to make it work.
And that's
family.
a good point for us to point out about North Carolina law that a lot of people don't understand, because when they start homeschooling, they think, okay, but what are the requirements of the state of North Carolina for my homeschool curriculum or credits? And the answer is there aren't any.
Right.
And so it's really important for homeschool parents to realize that you are completely in charge of designing or choosing the credits and courses that you give the kids.
The whole scope and sequence, and getting ready for high school too. Yeah. Some other things that I think that are really important for us to talk about is a lot of us, I thought, I have to have a schoolroom. When we first started homeschooling, we had a tiny little house. So I didn't have a schoolroom. We had milk crates, and I put the books in the milk crates and put them. I didn't even have a bookshelf. But now you look on
Homeschool
Pinterest.
family without bookshelves?
No bookshelves the first year. But then if you look online now as a new homeschooler, you think you have to have this intricate room that you see on Pinterest, with all the things on the walls and perfect little
designer.
desks. Yes, designer homeschool rooms. That's what we have nowadays. So we just have to know that we don't have to do that. If it makes you happy and it helps in your organization, by all means, have at it. But you don't have to do that to homeschool well. Another thing I think that's really important to talk about is hours. We don't have to spend as many hours homeschooling because the one-on-one tutorial method is much more efficient. Right? Yeah. And we don't have to spend, just school during school hours.
Yeah, that's right.
We can wrap it around our family, whatever works best for our family.
And a lot of people still try to do things in the morning, and I think that's effective, but you just don't have to. You don't have to start at a certain time. You don't have to end at a certain time. I think those are really good flexibilities.
And I think it's important to think about, too, that your kids, some kids are more naturally awake, especially if you have teenagers. Maybe they do better academically later in the day because teenagers need more sleep.
Right. That's right. Yeah, for sure.
Some other things that I think that we could talk about too is just realize that learning can take place outside of books. So there's field trips you can go on. You can go to the park. You can go have nature study that unfortunately most public schools can't do those kinds of things. So homeschooling is uniquely a place where you can make your school what you want it to be for your family in a way that they don't have the freedom to in schools.
And with that location type flexibility, I think desks are helpful, but they're not necessary. I mean, you can curl up on the couch and read, or a lot of times, the couch is my kid's favorite place to do almost everything. And maybe up in your room if you need some quiet, or you can move around and do different things. You don't have to be like, here's the schoolroom, here's the desk next to the flag. You have to sit in this desk.
Don't forget the bus. Yeah. I think that's so important because school can take place anywhere. And we even went outside and put a blanket on the ground and had school out there. It's just nice that you don't have to. And honestly, some of my boys actually did better not at a desk because they were so fidgety and wiggly that when we would read, it was really better for them to be on the couch and with Legos or something that they could manipulate to keep them from driving us all crazy.
That reminds me of an interview I did with Andrew Pudawa a year ago or so. And it's on our YouTube channel. You can go watch it. And it's about the learning differences between boys and girls. And you can hear him talk about a lot of the research that's been done and how boys need to move. That was the
learn,
research.
Yes.
Yeah. And so Dana, my wife, realized very quickly that she could not spend all her energy making them be still because they were spending all their energy being still.
Yes, and not
and
able
not
to think.
listening. But if they
Yes.
can wander around and move around or sit weird, all of a sudden their brains are open to
That's exactly
learning.
true. But if you're trying to replicate school at home,
Yeah.
like I
You're not gonna see
my
that.
poor son who's in first grade, I should actually pay for counseling for him. I wanted him to sit at the desk with his feet on the floor. I mean, it's a
on the floor,
miracle
yeah.
that I homeschooled for 26 years. But somehow along the way, I learned that I don't have to be what the school is, and that my boy didn't have to sit there perfectly
Yeah.
still. Because like you said, Dana said, they're concentrating
Yeah.
totally on being still. Exactly.
So one other quick story on that, since we hit that little nugget. My mom, even though I wasn't homeschooled, she brought me home half a day every week for what she called wisdom class. So she was like getting close to homeschool, you know?
Wow.
And she would take me to the park to a little pond, and she would teach me scripture memory. But she would give me a verse, and then she would let me run around the whole pond. And then she would give me another verse, and I had to run around. So she knew automatically. She's like, let him run because he's not going to sit still.
That
she
is
was
awesome.
smart. Yeah.
She was
She was ahead of her
homeschooling
times,
and
yeah.
didn't know it. Wow. I'm impressed. Somebody should definitely try that.
Yeah. So I just had one other thought, and then we'll see if you have anything to wrap it up with. And that is something I've told my high school kids that I've learned from my own productivity. And that is I don't have to do 6 different little tasks or subjects every day. It could be history day, you know?
Yeah.
And when you kind of batch things together, you get momentum in that subject. So I don't make my kids you have to do all 5 subjects every day for 5 days. And just the flexibility of this could be math day. This could be, math's better maybe broken up, but this could be history day or this could be science day, and let them work on it as long as they want to.
I think that's a great idea. And plus giving them the autonomy to be independent
Yeah.
learners and do their
responsible,
schedule.
that's right.
I think that's a great idea.
Any last thoughts on this?
I just think get out there and make your homeschool what the Lord wants it to be. And He'll give you
Yeah.
direction and everything you need to do it well.
And as you said, on our last conversation last week about the uniqueness of children,
Yes.
I think this is another time to be really tuned into what do my kids need?
Yeah.
And what are their learning styles, and how can I set this up so that
Right.
it works best?
Are they naturally organized or naturally unstructured? And if you can work within that I think that's a good way to do it.
All right, good.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to our homeschool reality moment. And this is the segment when we take a look at your homeschool and find out what's going on in the homeschools in North Carolina. And today we have a video from Melanie, who shares a great idea for keeping communication open with your kids. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm Melanie, and I am a homeschool mom, and I teach 6 of my children. So, we, being a large family, sometimes struggle with the best ways to communicate. And we have many remedies for that. But today I want to share with you one of the ways that I use just to communicate one-on-one with each of my children. And so what we do, because I know sometimes growing up is hard and finding that trust level in being able to communicate with your parents openly, what we've done is each child has a notebook, and now that we're many years in, several notebooks, that we actually write letters back and forth to each other. And this way they can communicate with me and I can communicate with them. Some days it's something simple, like this is the dream I had last night, or what do you think about me doing this? And sometimes we get really in depth and we talk about some really great things. But it's just a place that they learn to share with me. And we do it almost every day. So it's not just a whenever they feel like it type thing. And what I've really found that works great with that is not only the communication between us, but that I get to use it to look over and help them with their grammar or their spelling or any other composition issues that they may be having. And they tend to glean a little bit more from that information than if they were writing a paper for history or English, because they actually care about what they've written to me a little bit more on most occasions. And so this is just something that we use, and I hope it would be something that you could find useful in your homeschool family. I hope you have a blessed day.
That was Melanie. And wasn't that a great idea?
it is.
It's an
Haven't done
awesome
that
idea.
before.
I haven't either. I had a teacher in high school that used to do that, one of my
Neat.
English teachers. But
Actually, I did have this little season where me and one of my daughters wrote a note to each other every day. So maybe we got close
almost,
to that.
that's pretty close.
I need to revive that. I think.
Yeah.
So we would love to see what's going on in your homeschool also. If you would like to submit a video to the Homeschool Reality Moment, you can send it to the homeschool show at nche.com. That's our email address. And if you'll just be sure and share with us an idea that you have or a story that would be helpful, and be sure and record that horizontally with your phone, and that will work much better on the show.
Thanks so much for joining us this week. We'd love to hear from you. Send your questions and feedback to the Homeschool Show at nche.com. And also, please help others find the show by subscribing, rating, and leaving a review on Apple Podcast and YouTube. If you think this show would be helpful to your friends and family, please let them know about it. To learn about how to subscribe to our show as a podcast and on YouTube, you can go to nche.com/The Homeschool Show. And don't forget, we'll be starting Season 2 on August 1st.
That's right. And until next week, continue to homeschool with confidence and joy.